All right, I think it's about time to get moving. I want to welcome all of you to the December 2017 edition of FSMA Fridays. I'm Brian Sharp with SafetyChain Software, and I want to thank all of you for carving out some time during a very busy time of year and in what are all very busy schedules. But I think we're going to make some good use of the next 30 minutes together with our friends over at the Acheson Group. Got a lot of great info and updates to share with you. So thanks for joining us again this month. I know we've got a lot of familiar names and faces, and I think some new ones as well. So for those of you that may be new to FSMA Fridays, what is this thing? Well, it's actually the longest standing educational series focused on FSMA, and over the years, as it's gone from something that was going to be, that became, and now is evolving, it's really evolved for us too into much more of an industry update. So we talk each month about FSMA-related news, changes and updates to all the regulations. We talk about industry trends, right? What are we seeing as this is being rolled out and adapted? And also, probably most importantly, is an exclusive opportunity to have Q&A with our partners over at the Acheson Group and really fire off some important questions to hear how they are handling this for their clients throughout the country. So we really do these for you. We encourage you to engage with us. Let us know what you want to hear, what kind of topics you want us to touch on. And we have an ongoing LinkedIn group where we continue this conversation. We'll give you some info about that towards the end of the show. As you can imagine, these take some time, energy, and some cost to put on. And we're really thankful for our partners over at the Acheson Group who have kindly donated their time and expertise to make sure we get all of that out to our community. And also sponsored on our side, of course, at SafetyChain Software, and we'll talk a little bit about how we each would love to help all of you more at the end of the session here. Talking about help, just a few housekeeping items to keep in mind. One is hopefully you enjoy the format. We like to say these are informal but professional, right? So we don't take ourselves that seriously, but these are serious topics. So we try and craft this in a sense that if we were all hanging out at a trade show or talking amongst ourselves in a hallway at a conference, this is kind of the format. So we hope you enjoy that approach, and we want to encourage you to join that conversation, ask questions. The more we can make this relevant and for you, the better. We will take those questions in and monitor them and hold them for our Q&A at the end, so don't worry. We'll make sure and try and touch on those, specifically the general ones. The more specific ones we'll probably save for an offline conversation, but we do try and get back to everybody. In regards to those questions, don't worry about anyone seeing them from your side. You'll notice that all of the attendees are actually blocked out. So we've got a full house today, which is awesome. But you'll notice you only see myself and Eric up there as panelists. So when you fire off your question, you can go to that little Q&A box in the bottom right and send us a note, and we'll all see that and be able to hear that, but won't be displayed to the peers in the room here. Probably the most common question is there a recording? Will the link be shared? Absolutely. As many of you have been coming for years, though, we send out a recording link. Probably sometime next week we'll share that, and we also share that in our LinkedIn group as well. And if you're having any audio issues, I know it sounds crazy, but every now and then some of these services, you might have a little WebEx kink. So usually the most common way to fix an audio issue is to go to your little call-in box. So if you hit the audio option, it'll give you the option to either use your web browser, your audio on your computer, or your phone. Typically just reversing whatever you're using currently will fix that. Or the good old just log out and log back in. But if you have any technical questions, fire them off the Q&A, and we'll try and do our best to help you there as well. So for this month, we always like to start off just with a quick update. There's always a lot of news moving and shaking. We'll cover those. We also have a focus for each month around FSMA. We thought this month would be a really cool opportunity to look back at 2017. Obviously, a lot of change. So Eric is going to take us through what some of the hot topics were for 2017, the impact they made, but also looking forward to 2018 and some interesting things on the horizon for sure that I'm sure all of you are eager to hear about. And then, as we mentioned, an opportunity for all of you to ask some questions of Eric and the Acheson Group team, and we'll get to as many of those as we can. So with that, I'm going to bring in my partner in crime today, actually the guy you're really here to listen to, Eric Edmunds. He's the Food Safety Director over at the Acheson Group. He's been kind enough to join us, I think, for like a few months in a row now. You're becoming a regular. I might have to put you on the other side of the slide here and be my co-host, right? So, Eric, can you hear me okay? Good. Yeah, see what happens when you do a good job. We just keep pulling you back. So, so thank you so much for being here. We've had rave reviews about you, so we're excited to have you share today. So with that, I'm going to get out of the way and let you talk about anything in the news. I know we're a little bit early in the month, so we got a couple weeks to go, but since we were last together, is there anything topical or news related on the FSMA front that you want to share with us?
Yeah, definitely, Brian, and thanks a lot. Just to start off, I guess the latest and greatest from the FDA specifically is the new guidance that came out just recently regarding foreign food establishments and foreign governments and what the FDA considers a refusal of inspection. Provides just general guidelines, and a lot of it is kind of typical stuff, and just touching on it, you can see how a lot of it may eventually relate to domestic facilities and how it follows a lot of the same parameters and criteria. So just touching on that, some of the most interesting things or basic things that it brings up, first being basically any delay in the inspection or access to records that's over 24 hours is considered a refusal of inspection, not providing access to all the records that FDA has authority to access, which is basically any food safety record at this point, and at the same time not just providing access, but copies of records as well. The two most interesting ones that I will like to see over the next couple of weeks, more opinions and see more comments from the industry and everything, is the two specific points that the guidance makes is refusal to allow photos of an inspection and refusal to allow samples of either the environment or product samples or things that are suggestive of pest activity. Refusal to allow photographs or taking sampling is considered a refusal of the inspection for FDA for foreign facilities in this draft guidance. So as always with draft guidance, it has that caveat that this is not required per the statute, but it is a you should be doing this, and this is FDA's current thinking. So it's kind of, it raises some eyebrows to see how that'll all play out. And right along with that, some of the news we've been hearing from industry and from the field is the Foreign Supplier Verification Program is becoming a real part of FDA's protocol. They've announced they did around, let's see, 285 inspections in the last year for Foreign Supplier Verification Program. Wow. And while they're still taking kind of an educate before you regulate thing, well, they may give you some leeway and do a re-inspection a little bit after to help you get your programs in place. They have already issued 483s enforcement actions for the Foreign Supplier Verification Program. So the time is not to hesitate on that one, especially because we've been hearing that over the next year, FDA plans on inspecting closer to 2,000 people that would be subject to the Foreign Supplier Verification Program.
Wow. And what was the first number you said? It was 400 something?
So the 483 is the enforcement letter that FDA leaves with the facility when they determine they're not in compliance. But the overall inspections, they inspected 285 importers. 285 in 2017.
My goodness. So a lot more inspections to come. Good times. All right. Yep. Well, good. Well, that's certainly something to keep an eye on, and I think, you know, to that point, you know, one of the things we talked about that might be good for this month is just to look back. So we try and have a topic each month, a focus, if you will, on FSMA, and one of the things we thought might be good is to look back at 2017 and some of these, major changes that had an impact. And so the way that I kind of positioned to Eric, I said, tell me what's the Acheson Group hearing, right? Why are people bringing you in to help them? What are hot on their minds? And obviously this list could be really long, Eric, but these were a few that I got from you. And I think the first one we would love to hear some of your thoughts on is looking back on environmental monitoring. It hasn't been that long. I think you'd said that guidance doc came out 3-4 months ago, and I know it was touched on in a prior FSMA Friday a little bit, but can you talk a little bit about this environmental monitoring and the impact that it had in this past year?
Yeah, so environmental monitoring has been a big concern and a big issue that's being addressed by industry and everyone out there since the rules were initially proposed, especially for ready-to-eat foods. And it's been a regular thing that we've been helping people with, whether developing new environmental monitoring programs or going in and helping to identify whether proper sites have been identified for testing or whether the environmental monitoring is comprehensive or done at the right times for the facility to give a good statistical representation of the environment and the sanitation procedures that are taking place in those facilities. The FDA guidance, while it provided guidance, it also raised more questions, bringing into this fact that it's addressing listeria specifically in ready-to-eat food environments where the food's exposed to the environment, but something that hasn't been industry standard for long that is very specific in the guidance that is talking about environmental sampling of zone 1 food contact surfaces during production and during processing. Which obviously brings concerns for products in terms of developing testing and holding programs, and really seeing how strongly the FDA will be enforcing that of that guidance document. So it's been on the table, and you see a lot of people really kind of ramping up the environmental monitoring programs and kind of coming to the realization that something that will a lot of these will end up leading into things that we'll see in 2018, because any hot topic from 2017 that isn't already solved is going to be a hot topic again, at least for the first part of 2018. But yeah, we'll see how people are updating their programs and moving to new documentation procedures to facilitate and help monitor and trend their environmental monitoring records.
No, that's great. And you bring up a good point. And I appreciate you touching on that, because a lot of the folks listening, that is an impact for them, something they're keeping an eye on. But yeah, these hot topics don't come and go, unfortunately, right? They're constantly evolving, which is why I want to keep this going here. Let's talk a little bit about supply chain controls. And I know this was touched on a little bit last month, I think, by you actually, but there was some conversation, around the FDA sampling, undeclared allergens. This is a big deal in the supply chain world. Can you talk a little bit about what impact you've seen that make and any updates or changes there?
Yeah, last month we talked a little bit, well, specifically about the new guidances out for co-manufacturers, right. But in general, the big hot topic from 2017 is some of the major recalls caused purely by supply chain, whether it was an ingredient supplier not declaring a reform or not stating or letting a customer know about a reformulation of an ingredient that now contained dairy, or just an FDA inspection, or even in some instances, local health inspectors taking samples of product, or the Canadian Food Inspection Agency taking samples of product and tracing it back that had large lot runs that had been shipped to lots of people through the complexity of the current supply chain. So just a focus on the new supply chain controls and what's considered a preventive control under the new FSMA requirements, and working out how you're working with your suppliers and customers to provide assurances that certain hazards are controlled or not controlled, and determining where at in the supply chain they will be controlled to address the hazards that are presented.
All right, good. Well, thank you. And yeah, I appreciate you expanding on that, and it's come up a lot. As has something, so I just finished the conference circuit. I'm sure you've been out and about, as many of the folks on the call today have been. And this concept, I'm glad you brought this up, about training for employees and inspectors around FSMA. A really interesting topic that's getting a lot of buzz right now. So what are you seeing from your side in terms of what was going on around this topic in 2017?
Yeah, I mean, over this year, with the first compliance, they having only been around for a few months in 2016, and a lot of companies just having the more recent compliance deadline for the preventive controls, has been kind of a rush to say, what training do I actually need? Which rules apply to me? And how do I go about get that training? FDA has gone about recognizing a lot of different certification bodies that are training lead trainers and providing just general training as well. But the important thing to notice is that in a lot of these trainings, while the industry is sending all their employees there to learn all the new requirements and the difference between what a lot of people use is the HACCP programs and the new HARTC approach, FDA is right there alongside with you. They're in the same training classes, and they're in a learning process. And if you look at some of the numbers for inspections in the last year, the large majority of FDA inspections for any facility, let alone foreign or domestic, focuses solely on the new modernized good manufacturing practices. And very few looked into the actual preventive controls. So that training is still a hot topic to make sure people feel they're comfortable writing these new requirements and new food safety plans and being able to properly identify the necessary preventive controls and implement the monitoring and verification procedures or validation if it's necessary after that. And I know down here at the bottom we kind of threw in a question that was left over from LinkedIn from a previous one about how complicated it is to become a PCQI for an importer. So that would be the Foreign Supplier Verification Program rule. And there's a specific class for that in reality, to become a PCQI for these classes, there aren't a lot of prerequisites as far as getting into the class. The real question that you have to ask yourself, or companies have to ask themselves, is do they feel comfortable with this person's qualifications in evaluating all the hazards of the products? So it could really change for a lot of different people. For example, an importer bringing in finished product that has gone through validated processes through very respectable channels may not have a lot of work to do with addressing hazards in a food safety plan because they're not dealing with individual ingredients or multiple suppliers and more complex mixing and combination issues. So while no food science background is required to become a PCQI per the certification in FDA, it is very important to feel comfortable to know that you have the background, whether it be from the industry or a food science area, to address and identify hazards. And as with HACCP, a big focus on HARTC is still one person shouldn't be doing it alone. A company should be getting a team of various backgrounds and specializations to make sure that different hazards and areas of focus aren't being overlooked.
Right, great. And that was a great question, so we appreciate whoever submitted that on LinkedIn there. And yeah, interesting concept, this whole training together, right? Everybody's kind of in this together, and I love your phrase you mentioned earlier, that educate before you regulate. So speaking of regulation and looking forward to 2018, I'm sure your team over at TAG, you're always looking forward to kind of be a step ahead for your clients. And so I asked Eric, what's on your guys' radar, right? So what's important to you to be prepared for? And again, we could have a really long list, but we narrowed it down to a few. And I think one of the ideas or topics that came up for you, Eric, was around environmental sampling. And so interested to hear, your perspective and the Acheson Group, what do you see coming? Obviously, there's a lot of conversation around this. What do you see coming in 2018?
Yeah, well, there's a lot of discussion about why are so many more recalls happening, or why are these big recalls happening and things like that. But when it gets down to it, it's not that food's less safe than it has been. If anything, it's as safe as it ever has been. However, the investigative strategies and resources, scientific resources available for investigations of food safety outbreaks are much more usable and cost-effective and fast than they were even 10 years ago. So environmental sampling, everyone hears about FDA swabathons, and that's why FDA and the industry is working so hard to create sanitation programs with effective environmental sampling programs to make sure that if that happens in their facility, that they're prepared to know that they don't have any resident pathogens that are within their facility that can be determined for any length of time, because that's use of whole genome sequencing just creates a never-ending library of anything that's ever happened, and it could contain something that's made someone sick years ago that could somehow be tied through to a specific facility after years of additional sampling. So it's just something that being prepared with your internal environmental programs, if that does happen, and being on top of the game and being prepared for the reality that not only are people reporting illnesses more often, the health inspection agencies are doing it as well. Things are getting more public, and the investigation tools are quite incredible at this day and age.
Right, which is a great segue to the next one, because in a sense, if I'm hearing you right, you're saying the science and the technology is evolving, right? And that's why we're seeing and hearing more about these recalls when food's likely safer than it's ever been. So that kind of segues to this next topic around technology and what you termed as kind of this accelerated transition you're seeing happening with electronic records and data management. Something we see obviously a lot with the customers we work with, but from your side of the fence, talk a little bit about what you expect to see in 2018 around this.
What we've seen a lot is people are getting in line with their written food safety plan and getting all their programs in place. But once they have been into implementation for a little bit, they start to realize, well, how do I manage all this data? I'm not just taking all these records and doing all this work, requesting X amount of documents from every single supplier and managing them all in a file cabinet. It's not possible. And it's not feasible to go back and review them in the event of any situation where a recall may be a potential issue, or any other customer complaint, for example. So we're seeing a lot of transition to electronic data management that on one hand gets rid of the paper and the confusion, but on the back end, it actually helps with the efficiency of a lot of facilities, especially because there's a lot of record requirements that require regular review by a PTQI or a designated person that's trained to review the records within the 7-day time frame at a maximum. And a lot of electronic management just makes it so all these records get shipped straight to their desk, and they can review their records and spend less time fulfilling their requirements to visually and personally monitor every aspect of the floor.
Yeah, Yeah, it's a win-win for everybody for sure, and that kind of leads to maybe ultimately the driver of all this is the consumer, right? Consumer is king. Talk a little bit about transparency as this continues to become obviously more and more important in the marketplace. The demand they have as a consumer for more transparency. What do you see coming down in 2018 that might impact us?
Yeah, so in the past I've always said #1 priority is safe food, which I still think is a very high, if not #1 priority for most people. But what you see a lot now is people are more concerned about other issues as well, and that demand a complete transparency from a company that sometimes goes beyond general food safety practices. So beyond the transparency of dealing with a recall and dealing with different customer and consumer relations, industry has a lot on their shoulders in the future on certifying additional things, ensuring that as they go through a lot of consumer demand for reformulation of product to be more of the clean label type of product that is kind of a hot commodity right now, addressing the food safety issues, but at the same time looking into where ingredients are coming from for environmental concerns or labor strife, or whether the consumer is actually only going to buy things that are produced from a local food base type of thing. And then the additional schemes of everything adding in from consumer trends and purchasing and everything. But it's a lot of the certification schemes out there have already kind of looked in these different parameters that are kind of above and beyond the general food safety principles, looking into all those for quality and social purposes. And it's just another level that's going to be another thing to look into.
Right. Very, very good. And I think the question that we received online is really a great one. We're getting a bunch of great questions, and we may not have time for all of them. There's some really good specific ones that I've talked Eric into making sure he'll cover offline if possible. But I think this is a great one in general. You know, if when I interview, I'd love to ask this kind of, if you had to boil it down to one, what's the biggest regulatory risk in 2018 from your perspective, and for those that are listening, how should they be preparing for it?
The biggest regulatory risk for 2018, I'm going to say, is complacency, in a sense. A lot of people kind of look at these at the rules and thinking, oh, well, I've got everything, and I still hear from time to time, well, nothing's gone wrong. We've been doing it like this for a long time. So a lot of the little nuances within the rule, validation strategies, and whether you're verifying and monitoring your programs effectively really need to be done to the T. Because when FDA comes in, as far as the regulatory risk, if everything's not documented and done perfectly, it's they consider it to have never happened at all. So making sure those programs are buttoned up. I mean, with a lot of the compliance deadlines having passed, people haven't been putting their head in the sand. They had been getting prepared, but it's not. It's now that compliance deadlines have come around, it's not a time to take your foot off the gas.
Good point. Good advice too. So I know we're up against it. I do want to. I'm going to grab one of the questions that came in, and appreciate all of you that got have some still waiting that we haven't gotten to, and some are more specific. So Vernon, Richard, Michael, Laura, Amber, we're going to make sure and get those answered for you. But Amber had a good question here that I think could apply to a lot. It said, if a facility is implementing sanitation controls, are visual inspections sufficient, or should something like ADP swabbing be used? So regulatorily, there's a specific answer, but as best industry practice, there's a different answer is what I would recommend. So validation of preventive controls is only required for process preventive controls. And so technically, a visual inspection of sanitation is appropriate as a preventive control. However,
it doesn't always provide the perfect picture, and it shouldn't be relied on exclusively. So regular ATP testing and even testing for indicator organisms like APC, Enterobacter ACA are great tools that should be utilized to make sure sanitation is actually effective and not just looking clean.
Okay, great. So Amber, hopefully that's helpful. I think that's a good question for the audience. The others we'll make sure and get to offline. The other area we want to encourage you to as we wrap up today is we do have a LinkedIn group. You can look up FSMA Fridays. Great place to continue this conversation, and we'll get some answers to these other questions posted on there as well. As you can also check there for the recording that we'll be posting out sometime next week as well. And that said, obviously we are very, very grateful to have the professional expertise of Eric and his team over at the Acheson Group. So if you're looking for some help as you come into the new year, whether you're dealing with the regulations, safety plans, compliance, as you can tell, these are leaders in the industry, and you can certainly learn more about how they can help you. You can check them out at achesongroup.com. They've got a ton of great info on the website. You can also reach them by phone there as well. And we obviously are thankful for all the help you give, not only our community here, but to many of our customers as well. And on the software side, for those of you that are looking, we talked a little bit about electronic data management. We'd love to show you more about our cloud-based food quality management software and how it can help make life a little easier, whether you want to reduce the costs or the waste or the risk and heck, for that matter, the stress that goes along with managing all this. We've got some really exciting news coming out in January, and we'd love to show you what we're up to and how we can help. So check us out at SafetyChain.com as well. In terms of other resources, we'll get the recording out next week, so watch for that on email and LinkedIn. We'll have a short demo day, show you around some of the exciting new tools that we have. That'll be next week as well. And always encourage you, if you got to pick one read, grab the TAG newsletter. Lots of great info, and a lot of what Eric touches on here you'll find in there as well. And please join us next month. Share with us topics you want covered, and we'll certainly make sure to, again, continue this conversation offline and also on LinkedIn as well. So, Eric, thank you again for joining us. You did a great job. I might have to drag you back again in January, so I appreciate it. Great job, my friend. Yep, and on behalf of yeah, for sure. And on behalf of the Acheson Group, SafetyChain Software, we want to thank all of you for making some time. We hope you all have a very, very wonderful, safe holiday season, and we'll look forward to catching up to you next year. Have a great day, everybody.